Hi, I'm Andy. Welcome to Turning with Disabilities. I have the privilege of sitting up here with two lovely guests with me today. I have Mr. Brent English to my very far side, and he is the owner of Robust Laves, and he makes a wonderful sit-down lave, so he's up here to talk about. If anybody has any adjustments that they need to make, he's here to help with that. And I have also beside me, oh gosh,
Alan. All right, Gil.
Mr.
Gil
Allen,
just came in
Mr.
here.
Allen. You better say your last name.
You're supposed to say
Last name is Zenreich.
Zenreich. I call him Alan Z. And then we have Gil Malay. That's a number 3 seat, right?
Yes.
It's a little hard when you can't see, but I hope I got it right. I wanted to open the floor by saying just a little bit. We're each going to say a little bit about ourselves. I've been blind about 20 years, and I started woodturning about 9 years ago. And I was the first student that was ever accepted to Aramont School of Arts that was blind. And when I first started at the school, everyone thought, oh, there's Andy, the blind gal. And here we are a lot of years later, and I try to go almost every year. And now I'm just Andy. So I'm really hoping by having this panel that we can answer questions about things that are important to you folks out in the audience. And beside me, Alan, he's a real computer genius. And
Whose computer just froze, so bear with me a minute.
But he's done so many things and has so many great ideas, so I wanted him to be a part of the panel.
I turned in high school, but I didn't come into turning until 15 years ago due to the fact that I was diagnosed with post-traumatic. I didn't know it. I worked in the trades. I'm a carpenter by trade union. This was the kind of work I did. And, well, coming out of the military, immediately I was, well, diagnosed with it, but I kind of fought going back for the treatment I received 15 years later, because once you've been in a psychiatric ward, it's not a place you check into, because you can't check out. So, sitting with my psychiatrist for 15 years, she finally said, Gil, you really need this program. I said, I'll only do it if the door is open, so I can come and go. I went in, and it was the best thing I ever did in my life. I felt totally safe, didn't want to come back out of the program because, well, it was not necessarily about me, but for me, utilizing a program set up for the veterans called Improving the Quality of Your Life. And by doing so, it's allowed me to get out of self-medicate and do all the other things that we do as, well, people with post-traumatic. And it's allowed me to be here today to communicate to you what I use my platform for. And it's remarkable because last night I got an email from some Marine in Chicago that read the story, and I need to call him tonight. Once again, it's years later, but once again the seed has been planted. I've helped 2 other club members receive the same program, and through the program they have bought me a one-way. And it was delivered to my house because all I had to do was complete the program. I could have fell asleep with the program, but I was successful at it. And I studied with Mark Fury, and the rest is history. So my platform here today is to let you family members, if you have any of that, if you have a veteran who can't speak to you and share the issues that he has, because most of them don't think they have one. I didn't think I had one until I went to the unit and found out, ooh, chronic. So that's what I intend to do with my platform, and it's been very successful, and it brings me out of myself. And once again, the ability to speak in front of people and do other things, that it's brought me a lot of joy in my life. So that's what I'm here for.
All right, I suppose now that I got my computer restarted, things are great until they don't work. And then you learn to adjust very quickly. In woodturning, we call these redesign opportunities. I met Andy, Lauren and I met Andy 4 years ago. We were demonstrating at the Tampa Symposium, and we had to go to the demonstrators orientation session. where they tell you about, you know, you have to wear a face shield, and these are going to be your room monitors and all this kind of stuff. And we walk into the room, and there's a table of people, and there are 2 blind woodturners and 2 woodturners in wheelchairs. And we say, we're going to go sit with those people, because those are going to be really interesting people. You know, these are not necessarily your person with gray beard, you know, that's turning brown and round. These are going to be kind of special people. And you know, they're great. Someone in the audience go, gray beard, yeah, right. And if you wait long enough, even the women have gray facial hair, so it's pretty good. They just adapt, right? So Andy was going to do a panel that, in fact, she called it this earlier, this before I started recording, she called this Woodturning with Disabilities. And Andy and I, over the years, have talked about sort of rebranding this. It's not Woodturning with Disabilities, it's Woodturning with Physical Limitations. Because although I think the first panel, I sat in the audience, this is the first time I'm on the panel here, but I used to sit in the audience, and a woman said, my husband had a stroke, and he no longer can use his left arm. How can he continue to do wood turning? Or my eyesight is failing, or I can't stand at the lathe as long as I used to stand. For most of us, wood turning is a hobby. We're not depending on this for our living. We enjoy wood turning. And as our bodies change, or as we know people who are working with limitations that are literally becoming more limiting for them, what they can and cannot do, how do we extend their turning ability? How do we make it more enjoyable? As people get arthritis, we have another person here, Chuck, I will turn on your mic in a minute. We have another person here. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Massachusetts, and Chuck's been a woodturner for a while, and he'll explain what his situation is, and he made a little video for us to watch. It's about 6 minutes or so. And Lauren was listening to this phone call, and she said, oh, you should invite him into the panel here. And then we were talking to Brent about sit-down lathes, and Lyle, I was talking to him, and he said, well, Lyle said, well, I did a video recently on turning with physical limits, and to be able to sit down and to use a captured or an articulated rig normally used for hollowing. Well, why can't that be adapted to do spindle turning? So for that person that can't hold the tool with one hand but could still guide the tool with another. Lyle, I haven't been able to bring up your YouTube video, but we'll have you talk about it. So between us all, we're sort of clever. I mean, we do workarounds. We figure out what works for us, or we know people have had situations, and how do we bring what we know how to do, and sometimes thinking way outside the box, into the discussion. So let me put Chuck on the screen. And Chuck, I'm going to turn on your audio, and I don't want you to spend too much time other than just saying hello, because then I will play your video for a couple of moments. That's okay with you, because we've got an hour and a half. Yes, so that we've got some time. But this is going to be a very interactive discussion. This isn't us talking to you. This is us talking amongst ourselves. So that's going to be very important. So Chuck, they can see you, and I'm assuming that that you can see and hear us. Yes?
Yes, I can.
All right. So why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody. I mostly just see myself.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show you the room.
Good, because I'm scaring me.
Notice he has gray beard, so he fits right in. So Chuck, where do you live?
I live in Rhode Island.
And how long have you been turning?
I've got a bad cold, so excuse me. I've been turning for about 8 or 9 years.
All right, so let me jump over to this video. Now, Chuck's wife recorded this video, and I just edited it. I think it runs maybe 6 minutes, maybe 8 minutes. I think it's really interesting. So I'm going to turn off Chuck's mic for the moment, and let's just play this.
Okay.
I'll turn you off from here.
Hi everyone, my name is Chuck Beeland, and when Alan asked me about doing a video about turners with limitations, I said sure. I'm a wood turner. My limitation is, if you ever seen someone that has Parkinson's, the way they shake, I shake similar. But whereas Parkinson's is going to kill you, what I have is called essential tremors. What it means is I shake. So far it's just my hands and my head. But I came down with the second disorder. It means dystonia. Either your head tilts either to either shoulder or twist. And as you can see, my head twists to the right. There's no cure. It'll never get better. It'll only get worse. So doing things gets to be very difficult. Eating, writing is almost impossible. But I'm going to do a short video to show you how I looked like before the items I used to try to help me. One of them is I use 3-pound wrist weights to try to calm down my tremors. And I have these gloves, but these are the ones that I use. They have 1-pound weights over here to try to calm down the tremors. But I have those in work. I haven't bought a pair yet to use down here. So it's about 4 pounds I wear when I turn to try to help me control it. And of course, I always use a full face shield because it's very easy for me to blow up things. I'm going to show you what it looks like before I use the weights and afterwards. The speed is about 1600. And as you know, everything is either a bead or a cove. I'm going to try to do a cove.
I spoke to him this morning, and he understood the joke when I said, "Oh, you've got a built-in chatter tool."
As you can see, it's not very good. Now come over here and I'm going to try to do a bead. See, it's not very round in the cove. Yeah, of course you can see a lot of tear out. Now I'm going to try it with my wrist weights.
And as you can see from the video, it's not a whole lot of fun even putting on the weights.
Oops, wrong one. As you can see, it does help a little bit. Now I'll try to round over.
Michael, can you hear the difference? David? Me too.
And I keep my fingers here to help steady my hand to stop it from shaking as much. Take a look. At least this one here, you can see it's pretty well rounded compared to this one. So the wrist weights do help. Making the tear up isn't as bad, but it's still really not acceptable. Unfortunately, I have to use the 80 grit gouge quite often, depending on the type of wood. Let me show you this.
He's not the only one.
I was making a 10-inch bowl. You know, as you can see, I like the shape of this one. It's about maybe a little less than half an inch, turned into a funnel. I got a twitch, and my gouge went right through the bottom, all through a quarter of an inch. A piece of babinga, 6 inches by 3 inches. Someone wanted me to make them some champagne glasses for a toast for a wedding. As you can see, the fit in there is pretty nice. This took me 3 hours.
For those of you that can't see, it had split where the glass
I was trying to do a
enters
couple
the
of
stem.
captive rings, but again, I got a twitch and busted it through.
But you haven't had many successes, too.
Yes, I have. One thing that does help is to use items that are heavy, like eating utensils. I use the heaviest that we can buy. And when my wife and I will go to a restaurant, she has to cut up my food for me because I can't. My hands are shaking too bad. And then again, you have the people looking over at you, whispering. I mean, people are ignorant. So I just try to ignore them. But it does get frustrating. This is a piece of walnut. I like to turn it into a jewelry bowl that I make. So far it's going good. This is the same, only this is a piece of babinga. Just try for a different shape. Hopefully it works. One thing I do make a lot of is cigar pens, because for us to write, you need to do the heaviest you can do. So I use a cigar pen, and I use the acrylics, because the acrylics add a little bit more weight. And I've made about 50 for people in this Facebook group that I'm one of the admins in. And so far, everyone says it helps them write a lot better. It's also good for people that have any type of what I have is called movement disorder, Parkinson's, ET, even with people with arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, because the larger pen is easier to hold and it's easier to write with. Alan's going to put a link at somewhere within this thing that he's doing to show you a 5 or 10 minute YouTube video to show all the different things that people with what I have, what they deal with on a daily basis. I hope you watch it. It's a hobby that I really love to do. It takes me a lot longer to do it. But I just have to find ways to make it so I can still do it. Okay, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it, and keep turning.
So I'll post this, and these are two links to YouTube videos that he pointed out. And this morning, Chuck, this morning you and I were talking, and you were talking about sort of this realization that you had. Can you talk just very briefly about your roughing gouge and the epiphany you came to?
Well, one thing that helps is if you have a problem, you share it with others, because the more people working on it, the more solutions. And I totally messed up my spindle roughing gouge trying to sharpen it on a Wolverine, because as you saw my hand shaking, it's very difficult. And I made a post in this forum I belong to, Woodturners resource. And a friend of mine asked me, he said, send it to me. He said, I'll come up with a solution to help. And I sent him my spindle roughing gouge. And about 2 weeks later, he says, I'm gonna send you something in the mail. And he sent me my spindle roughing gouge, perfect shape. But he also made me a device to hold it onto my Wolverine, the plate. And inside there's a piece of some type of very slippery plastic, and I can sharpen that, and it comes out perfectly every time. The more people you have working on a problem, the more solutions you get to that problem. Because I never would have thought to do that. I just needed someone that has different experiences in life where they can use their experiences and help me come up with solutions.
Well, that I think was one of the main takeaways that I had from talking with him. I'm going to mute your audio again because we're getting a little feedback through your speaker, and that is why this is a collaborative effort. This isn't just a vendor coming up with a solution. This is us, bringing our backgrounds. Brent, would you talk for a couple of minutes about how you decided to make sit-down lathes, or
Sure.
how did this come to be?
Sure, thank you. I got my first interest in adaptive devices through my father. My father was a shoe repairman, old-fashioned cobbler, and customers would come in that were polio victims and use leg braces, or people that had prosthesis, artificial arms or artificial legs that in those days had leather straps on them and other fittings, and he'd repair those types of things. So I had this early exposure and interest in adaptive devices from a young age, being in my father's shop. When I got into wood turning and when I started Robust Tools, David Ellsworth actually approached me. He had met a young man in Florida by the name of Adam Hood, who had had a severe motorcycle accident and was paralyzed from the chest down. And Adam had taken up an interest in wood turning through his father, who was a professional woodworker. And so they had rigged up a mini lathe on a couple of 2x4s on some sawhorses and things like this. And David came back from meeting this fella and said, Brent, you need to do something in an adaptive way to help people who use a chair that want to turn wood. And getting input from Adam, and I had 3 other wood turners that used chairs. Some of them were, one of them guy was a polio victim, one guy was a motorcycle accident, and the other fellow just had, his knees had gotten bad and he was, turning from a seated position. With their input, I designed my first iteration of the lathe, which we called the Independence. And I chose the name because it was designed to give someone in a chair the independence that they needed to get at a lathe and be really accessible to it. So we tried to factor into some of the different dynamics between turning from a seated position that you have from turning in a standing position. And one of them was lowering the lathe down to a reasonable position when you're seated, and the other one was adjusting the ability for the lathe to tilt. Because when you're standing up, when you're a standing turner, you're typically bent over towards the lathe. And when you sit down, your back straightens up, maybe even leans back, and to have that same presentation to the wood means tipping the lathe forward.
So Brent, let me interrupt you for a moment if you don't mind, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to play your video about the Scout lathe. To me it was interesting because I really like the Scout, but you also make the stand available separately. So I've moved a few minutes into the video, so now people can see what we're talking about here.
Holes are provided if you want to bolt the stand to the floor or add
Just
leveling
before you
pans.
get into the seated stuff.
The center section doubles as a tool rack. There is also a tool rack on the top of each leg. Here we see the universal stand adjusted for a seated turner. We've dropped the height and tipped the lathe forward for a more natural tool presentation. It only takes a few minutes to make these adjustments, but it is best to take the lathe off the stand first. The universal stand is readily adapted to other lathes with the addition of user-supplied adapter boards. We just use 2x4s and lag bolts to fit this Nova to the stand. Your solution might be more elegant.
So
you should probably quit there.
Okay.
Yeah, so from the independence, we moved to this new Scout lathe. We introduced this last year at AAW at Atlanta. And we have instead of having to buy a whole expensive robust lathe and a stand, you can buy just the stand and adapt it to a mini lathe. So somebody who, say, has a mini lathe or a Nova or any sort of a mid-sized or smaller lathe, you can adapt it and use this stand and drop it down and tilt it and make it for a more user-friendly experience when you're in a seated position. So what Alan was talking about was it's a collaborative effort. I don't need to turn from a seated position, and I don't understand all the problems that are encountered with us turning from that position. So it was really important for me to have the input from the people who do need that and use that, so that I could do something that would be useful.
Do we have any questions out there?
Well, my question, but there is a myriad of problems.
Wait. Wait till Lauren gives you the microphone.
It's on?
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of problems turning well seated. It's starting even with the tools, particularly in a bowl gouge that's 18 inches long. It's just too long for me. I've adapted my shop where I now have my lathe on a Lazy Susan, and then I'm now sitting in a tractor seat on 3 wheels. And being able to move around has helped tremendously, especially if I'm doing a bowl, to be able to turn the lathe so I can get in the endwise instead of being on a bench or a fixed position where I used to have to really reach in and see. I even tried turning backwards. Using a reverse type scraper and going in with the lathe running backwards. It works, but not comfortable.
But I like this thinking outside the box. The swiveling a Lazy Susan is just another approach to the problem. That's what we were talking about before. Especially sometimes when people haven't seen an approach, they don't look at one particular approach and they don't realize that what they're trying to do is impossible, so they try it and they get something useful out of it.
What lathe are you using, sir, that you're putting on the Lazy Susan?
It's a 1424 jet.
Okay.
Yeah, it works really well.
And have you shortened your tool handles?
I just use the smaller handles, the smaller tools.
Right.
So, yeah, I have cut some.
Yeah. That's what I found when I was seated too, is that I need to to really be effective, I needed to have short handles so that I could move them in front of my body. Otherwise, I was always hitting the tool handle on my
Right, because
body.
you can't move your body when you're sitting. And
Right.
I used to sit in a conventional wheelchair, and it doesn't slide like the three-wheel tractor seat I'm on now, which I love. You know, and another thing I was thinking about listening to the other fellow on the video there, many of you knew Wally Dickerman. In the recent years before he passed, he was using something that was equivalent to a crutch with the cuff that goes around the arm, but rather than having the full crutch, he had different tools he could stick in the end of it. He didn't have to hold his hand sideways. He could just keep it in the natural position and still turn. It was pretty ingenious the way I thought.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, the first time I mentioned that this woman talked about how her husband had this stroke and only had use of one arm, I said, you know, because when I do hollowing, which is rare, I use like a monster hollowing tool, an articulated arm. And I said, well, something like that could be turned around and maybe work for spindle turning. And I know Trent Bosch makes a thing called a stabilizer, which is, again, usually used for hollowing. And I was talking to him about it, and he said, you know, some of his customers are doing just that, because this one sits in the tool post, you see, and it's holding the tool so they can go and do spindle work with that. And Lyle, I was mentioning this to Lyle the other day, and Lyle said that, oh, I just did a YouTube video about that. So why don't we, is it okay to pass it off to Lyle? Lauren, hand the mic over to Lyle. And if our intrepid cameraman there can grab Lyle. And by the way, our cameraman, Tom, actually has some interesting expertise that we just found out about just before, so I want Tom to chime in whenever he can. So Lyle, you're up.
Well, I want to thank Gil for his service and the inspiration that we get from Andy and others that are helping people do this. This is wonderful. I really love the word adaptive. That's what we're doing. We're adapting things to work. And I've helped, I'm a veteran myself. I wear a flag on my sleeve. And I've helped many veterans around the country, mentored them to continue turning or to work into turning with physical issues. And people with strokes or other things too, but I've really kind of centered around veterans. But I think my whole focus is more on the process. There's some things that you can do. The tools and the adaptive things will help you get there, but there's easier and harder ways to turn. And so the advice, first thing I would say, is get some help with somebody that's a good turner that you can work with to get the skills down so that the techniques that you're using are easy. And that'll help improve your capabilities. And we all have to think about this. I don't know how many people in here are totally physically healthy, but as we age and get on with things, we're all going to have issues. We're all going to have a bad elbow or a bad knee or something. So we all need to adapt, and we have to use some ingenuity to get there. Gil mentioned, you know, the mental issues. Turning is therapeutic. I mean, just to get in the shop and the whole rest of the world melts away is a great way, and it's you know, the message here to get some help and start to work in your methods that are easy. The right tools are important. You know, I did a system sitting with one hand, did a whole bowl. It took me a little bit longer than normal, but it's possible. Many of the people that I've helped, there's different stages of physical issues. Many of the people that I've helped are using a stool on wheels of some sort, like you were with your tractor chair, so that you can maneuver. rather than being stationary in a wheelchair, if you can have some maneuverability. So there's different levels of your maneuverability that will help you continue to turn and have some fun with it. But it's doable. I guess don't let the limits get in your way, as Andy and others have showed us. They're quite inspirational to all of us at what they can do, and don't let the limits get in your way. There's a way. If you can't figure it out yourself, there's somebody next door that can help you, so reach out, and there's always people willing to step in and work with you.
Yeah, and go to YouTube. Lyle recently made a video about this, and the name of the video is Physical Limits Turning. So search YouTube for Physical Limits Turning and Lyle, because probably aren't two of those out there. And it's an interesting video. Gil, last year, and Andy, remember last year we were opening up the discussion, and it had to do a lot with how you teach people. And exactly. one of the people said, yeah, but I'm working with veterans. Trying to teach veterans wood turning very often is different than trying to teach high school students. They both know everything, you see. So Gil, what is your experience, Gil, with working with veterans, and as opposed to teaching any other novice wood turner?
Well, the veterans I've encountered, like you said, tend to know everything. And they don't really want to be told, and yet they do want to learn. My primary interest is Tai Chi. I'm a Tai Chi practitioner, and when that came into my life, it changed a lot of things. As a matter of fact, the doctor said, your balance mentally and physically is due to you practicing Tai Chi. And years ago, when David Ellsworth came to our club, before I had a hip replaced, I shared with him something that he had mentioned in the demo he did, that he was at Aramont and he saw people practicing Tai Chi. And at the intermission, I said to him, I've been practicing Tai Chi for a long time. I compete internationally and nationally. He says, well, after you get your hip replaced, take all the techniques that you know from Tai Chi and apply them to the lathe. Because when a tool is in your hand, it's a part of you as opposed to a separate entity, and you moving your arms, because a small block of wood will beat you up. Where if you apply your body into it, that piece of wood has a little more challenging thing to do to beat you up. So I have a mentoring thing in my club called Body Mechanics at the Lathe. So when you come to my shop and you take my lesson on making a mallet initially, you will learn movements to utilize the tool at the lathe. Because so many of us approach the lathe this way, and you stand like a tower, and the first thing I'll do is push you. And all of a sudden your foot goes to the right place. I said, your body memory will remember that, as opposed to talking about it. I mean, I don't push them to knock them over, but enough to nudge them to all of a sudden their foot saves them, and it goes right where it needs to be. I said, now remember that. So I have a particular way of teaching people, especially military people, because they're more physical. Not all of them, but they never forget that, and most people don't. So I start with simple things like that. People moving at the lathe instead of swaying, as opposed to moving this way or laterally. Women tend to sway. For some given reason, they do. So you have to level the tool so that you move correctly at the lathe, parallel to the ways. And then moving with the cut, especially spindle cutting, you're limited on a spindle to, you have to move parallel with it. Well, you need to be taught that. Even if you know, some people get in their own way. So when I was taking lessons over at Bucks County, ex-Marine was an instructor with Mark, and I was a little heavier back then. He comes up to me and says, get out of the way. I'm like, I didn't know what he meant. So he was saying I was getting my own way. And it was improper posture at the lathe. So from that moment on, I started realizing, gee, I could apply these movements that I know from Tai Chi, and things opened up for me. So sharing that with David, he says, apply that. And that's what I have done, veterans and civilians, just to use that movement from the martial arts, which Tai Chi is, and being very present also. Because once you turn on the lathe is doing its job. You need to be present with it at all times. So I've taken what I've learned from Tai Chi, which to me, as a carpenter, I applies all those principles at my work. Watching a young man grab a hammer and getting white knuckles, I said, what are you doing? You might as well just get rid of the hammer and pound it. Because once again, they think they need to hold excessively when a hammer just needs to sit between two fingers and let it fall. You don't even have to hold it. A saw also, the white knuckle. So there's a lot of little subtleties that I apply, and they are sensory. Yesterday I had a wonderful experience by putting a blindfold on my eyes and approaching the lathe. And it's something I'm going to apply also when they come to my shop anymore, because I'm all about your sensories. Forget the pictorial. I consider everything like a movie, but most people just watch the gouge, as opposed to the machine is vibrating. Well, they need a digital readout. Oh, do you really need a digital readout? The machine is doing this. Back off. There's so many subtleties that we take for granted, and those that are blind have those sensories much more heightened than we who have all our sensories. So to me, it's from standing on the ground to feeling the vibration, smelling the wood if you're burning it, hearing it if you're doing things incorrectly. So I really like working around the sensories as opposed to just teaching someone how to make something. So when I teach Tai Chi, I teach the essence of Tai Chi. I don't want to teach you Tai Chi. I've had a lot of other martial artists that have come to me, and I say, well, do certain moves, and I throw a punch. And they just want to radically throw a punch, and then I pull them. I say, how are you able to do that? Because you're too much in one direction, and I see it. So you need to go backward as much as you go forward. So Tai Chi is a little bit more heightened of the level of martial art because it's an internal art. So I've taken that art into the world of woodturning and present it at that level, and that's what I teach. I don't want to teach you how to make a ball or anything like that, but I'll teach you the edge of a tool, how it works. First lesson is to make a mallet. With those tools, I can do just about anything. Coves, beads, use it like a skew, use a parting tool to indent, make an indentation. So it's familiarizing yourself with the edge of a tool and knowing that how it works so that you can make anything.
So Gil, along with you're stressing the sensory aspect of it, one of the issues is when the sensory capabilities change. And so why don't, Andy, why don't you talk a little bit about, I mean, there are people that are born blind, and there are people that go blind or become vision impaired. So Andy, you can either talk a little bit about your own experience and or call on some people in the audience who have some rather unique perspectives on this.
Well, right now I think I know two people in the audience that are kind of in the same boat I am. I have David to my left, who is just recently become blind, and Michael, could you tell us what kind of is that you're using for sensory?
Yeah, I'm totally blind. Been blind 14 years.
Can you just hold the microphone just a little closer, please? Thank you.
14 years. Been turning about 9.5 of them. I actually taught myself to turn, but it's a whole different story. I agree with Lyle there. I do demos all over, and I get people in my class come up to me and say, I got a neighbor, I got a buddy, I got a nephew that's blind or went blind. What kind of advice can you give me to teach you? And the first two questions I ask is, did he turn before he went blind, or is he a new turner? And it's about 50-50 where people lost their sight and quit turning. And those are the people I'm trying to get a hold of. Those are the people I'm trying to touch when I'm turning. And secondary, the people that know someone that's blind. Get them in the shop. Get them out there turning. It's simple, it's easy. Just go nice and slow. Go nice and slow.
That's better. Thank you.
And as Lyle said, I didn't know when I started turning, I didn't know anyone that turned. I was a woodworker. I had a mini lathe in the corner that my sons turned ink pens on. I never turned. I've never seen a bowl turned. And like Lyle said, get out there, find somebody that can turn, come over and show you how they do it, and then you adapt to what works for you. I don't know nothing about no Tai Chi, but I do what feels good to me, what lets me do it with ease and stress. I use some tools, well, I use most tools all wrong. I make a lot of jigs, a lot of adapting. I really, really enjoy turning. I turn every day of my life almost. I ain't turning today. But I have them, people call me and say, well, I tell them, just take them out in the shop, turn the speed down slow. I said, whatever you're going to do, practice it with the lathe off. Get them moving, get them pushing the tool, then turn the lathe on, and don't give them a square chunk of wood. You round the wood for them at the beginning. Let them get the feel of it, let them feel how it cuts, what to do, then let them round their own piece of wood.
Michael, do you think it's better to give them a piece that they can finish quicker than not quicker, like in one visit with you?
A very beginner, yes, probably, because that's one of the things I stress. It's so fulfilling to get a piece finished, and for some other turner to say, "Oh man, this is so nice," and that is so fulfilling to someone. But yeah, if I was starting a young person that said, "I want to start a bowl," I would give them. I twice turn everything almost anyway. I'd give them a once turn bowl, and I'd get it all squared up for them and say, "Okay, now this is what you got to do," and let them reduce the bowl down to a bowl.
Well, for people that were here yesterday, we had guests from a local organization. What's the name of the organization?
Alpha Point.
Alpha Point, and so we had about 20 or so guests come in who were blind or visually impaired, and we had close to 30 woodturner volunteers, and they each went to the lathe and they completed a project. As you were saying, doing pens is a wonderful example of this.
Yes.
And the blanks were already turned round, so they shaped the blanks, they sanded the blanks, they applied a friction polish to the blanks, and used a pen press to assemble the pen. And the look on these people's faces to walk out with a pen, and they're beautiful pens, I mean, the beautiful wood. I don't know how many of them have been sucked into the vortex of wood turning as of yesterday. and their club was given, their organization was given a lathe, so they'll be able to do it in their, I guess, their crafts room or whatever.
They're going to be sharing the crafts room.
Right.
And David, if you could say a few words about how wood turning has been for you, and how it has changed your life, and some tips that you can give people.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I went blind 4 years ago. I was turning before that a little bit, not much, but a little bit, so I knew some of the basics of it. And then when I lost my sight 4 years ago, I really wanted to get back into it, and got a local gentleman here, Anthony Harris, who was turning, and he just walked me back through it. One of the things that it was interesting for me, Anthony would say, we'd be turning something, and he'd say, well, what do you see? What do you feel? And it's like, I had 5 eyes instead of 2, and all these fingers were on the wood, and it was crazy just trying to assimilate all the information that was going on with feeling the wood. And I turn, and I actually have my hand a little bit on the wood, so I'm in touch with the wood with the tool, but I've got my hand on there as well. And it's been an interesting experience. Andy, is that kind of what you wanted? What else?
What do you think the things as you were turning, what were you thinking about sensory-wise?
Sensory-wise, I do listen to the sounds. I listen to the tool. If I'm on the bevel and I can hear it a little bit more, I can hear where I'm at. I know that I'm cutting the wood correctly, using the spindle gouge or whatever. Using the Easy Wood tool, I can hear what's going on. I can smell what's going on if I'm doing it wrong or if I'm moving too slow. So I am, like you said earlier, I'm listening to all my other senses as well. Since my sight's not there, I have to develop better hearing, and the smell comes into place. Friction on the fingers when it gets hot, I know where I'm at with that. So,
as a student, what kept you motivated?
What kept me I've always been a woodworker. My dad and grandfather were woodworkers. I just realized that going blind at 59, I couldn't sit on the couch and watch Ellen DeGeneres every day. I mean, she makes me giggle, but I still can't watch her every day. And I had to get up and do something, and turning and woodworking was a good answer for me. And I love it. And boy, I found some great people here in Kansas City who have been helping me along the way, and meeting Andy, and now this program at Alpha Point has been, it's been great. And the Alpha Point experience will be me kind of paying it forward now with the students there at Alpha Point.
So when I met Andy a couple of years ago, I'm a techno geek, you see, and which doesn't surprise anybody. And so I had suggested, I was talking about how to use video in turning projects, whether to be doing magnifications or still picture overlays on live video. And one of the things that I had suggested to Andy was, at her local lighthouse, I believe, was to do something to sort of augment the spectator's view. So you want to talk about that a little bit, Andy?
Yes, we installed pretty much a fancy TV screen, being as I can't see it and I don't know all the technical terms like this lovely fellow does over here. We installed a TV screen. Many of our folks at the lighthouse where I teach in Tampa, the first one, they can see with some special gear on, whether it be glasses or special adaptive wear. And so we had the screen, and we usually have anywhere from 10 to 14 students at a time in our classes. So, and we have 2 lathes. So we wanted to give them an experience as well as being at the lathe. So we have a big screen, and it shows folks' hands on the lathe at the same time we're turning, and it has been really, really beneficial. And it's all thanks to Alan. He suggested we do that, and it really does enhance things and how people can actually see what's going on, when they need to have things magnified.
Now that is a fairly rudimentary version of what could be done. So, for example, if a computer was added to it, not only can you zoom and things like that, but you might be able to adjust the contrast. You might be able to reverse, maybe, even in Windows, some people do best with monochrome white letters on black background. Some people would be black letters on white background. Some maybe to posterize it, to accentuate the edges and things like that. So part of it might be for the person at the lathe, and sometimes it's for the people that are watching the person at the lathe. The key here is, how do we use, my part is, how do I use technology to help people that are not being well served by their current tools and processes? What can we do to make it easier for people? I tell people I was born without the sports chromosome. I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I don't want excitement in my wood turning. I don't want excitement in my airplane flights either. I wanted to be,
Vanilla.
Yeah, very, very vanilla. I don't want stories to tell about this last trip I took. I don't want to have the story about how this thing blew up, that this piece on the lathe there. And so by looking at things like video, by looking at things like the internet, to be able to share what you're doing, to be able to record something that you're doing, and then have somebody else that may be visually impaired or hearing impaired. One of the reasons why I like incorporating video, and you see I was flipping back and forth picture in picture from time to time, to have someone doing American Sign Language where somebody could be watching a screen while somebody is turning and the signer is right on the screen with them, rather than them having to look away from the screen to see what is being said. To be able to incorporate that, or to be able to incorporate somebody doing live, real-time closed captioning. I was talking to somebody at the vendor area today about their new video for their product. And I said, you know, if you're going to show this video at a booth, whatever narration is going on, that should be in text at the bottom of the screen, because you can't hear the narration when you're in a vendor hall. And so why not make it so that somebody understands what it is that they're seeing? Closed captioning is a very good, someone may not be hearing impaired, but it doesn't mean they still can't hear it because of the noise in the room. So what can we do with video, with audio, with 3D printing? One of the reasons I got into 3D printing was to print prosthetic hands for children born without fingers. And so there's a whole movement of volunteers that are doing that. And now, in fact, I'm associated now with this thing that's rebranding themselves as LimbForge. And LimbForge is making, volunteers making prosthetics. And some of these are very functional prosthetics. So it'll be a prosthetic that will fit on somebody's hand or remains of the hand, and have tools that kind of snap into it, kind of like Inspector Gadget, for lack of a better term. And just thinking about that, Tom might have a little insight into this. Yeah.
Okay, well, I just got this to working, so I wasn't paying full attention to you.
Well, come, if you don't mind, come over here for a minute. We've conscripted Tom. Oops, let's see. Let's do...
I'm an occupational therapist, by the way. I do home health.
Let's try this one here. Okay. So what's your, have you had any occupational therapy or prosthetics and things like that? Have you had much experience with people sort of either returning to woodturning or maybe woodturning as therapy?
Well, no. I've worked with prosthetics, so I am familiar in some regards. I've unfortunately not had patients who did woodturning. I could probably have helped some had that been the case. But adaptive equipment is wonderful if it works for the problem that that individual has. And not every solution works for everybody, as we already have heard. If I can back up a little bit for just a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
If we go back to the video that we watched in the beginning, just watching the video allowed me to help, what's the fellow's name?
Chuck.
Chuck.
Who's still watching? Chuck is
to problem solve some. With Parkinson's and essential tremors, it's a matter of having weight, proximal movements, keeping things close to the center of the body. So if for example, he had something he could lean against, like that's close to the lathe, would help stabilize some of his tremors. In addition to having a weighted weight on his arm or hand, weight the tool more. Put something heavier in the tool, like shot. Drill the handle out and add some shot to it. Would help reduce the tremors. There could be other things as well. Like,
so you're suggesting the weights on his hands, maybe put it in the tool?
Yeah.
In addition.
In addition to?
Either in addition to, or the other way around. So it could work either way or both. Naturally, having something wrapped around your arm tends to hinder you in some certain ways. If it's the tool itself, it might not. And again, it's going to work different for different people.
Tom, what about sort of the ergonomics? And I'll give you an example of this. Lauren was talking to another a demonstrator here. Yeah, and what is a mic in the? Oh, yeah.
I've got it.
So
And she said
talk loud.
she was having all sorts of problems with her back hurt.
And, oh, thanks. She went to her physical therapist who said, I'm coming down to the shop to watch you work. And she was bent over in the lathe, and then he realized that the lathe was too low for her. Because she had been told it had to be, that shoulder, elbow height. And it had to be higher. So as soon as they raised it, all of a sudden she's up and she's not bending over anymore. And then she has like a monster arm kind of thing, and they raised that up, gave her another platform, and she's not like bending over looking kind of thing. She's straightening up, and her back stopped hurting. So, I asked her if it was okay to tell this, and she said it was fine because she couldn't come today.
Yeah, along the same lines, Lauren recently did a video with part of the new AAW initiative called Discover Woodturning, and this was entitled "The Anatomy of a Lathe," anatomy of a wood lathe. Yeah. And so she's standing in front of her lathe. This is my lathe, and then this is the headstock, this is the tailstock. So just to familiarize people that are rank novices with the lathe. And at the very end of the video of her 5 minutes and 59 seconds of fame, I've got about 20 seconds of her turning. And one person in this room whose name rhymes with Lyle said, her lathe is up too high, and that is a very reasonable observation. It is up too high for someone who is a bowl turner. It's not up too high for someone who's turning objects that are 2 inches in diameter, when you want to get it closer to your eye. Most people, when their bench grinders are down way too low. Their bench grinders should be up probably another foot closer to where, like reading distance. I've got 3 3D printers. All of my 3D printers have their print bed 42 inches off the ground. Why? I'm tired of bending over to see what's being printed. Let me work the ergonomics around me. So the sit-down lathe is putting the lathe in the right position for you. There is no one right position. This elbow thing is perfect for a certain type and probably a general guideline. But that's all it is a guideline. And it may not work for you because you may have long elbows or something, So that I think is very important.
You can look at chairs and tables.
One second. Let's give this back.
You can look at chairs and tables. They're all virtually the same, and that's because they're designed based on the average person, not an individual. And ergonomics, we live with it every day, whether we realize it or not. It's in your spoons that you use, your clothes that you wear. Everything that you touch is ergonomics. There was something else I wanted to add about that. I don't remember now, but it'll come back to me.
All right. So why don't you pass the mic back out to the audience? Thank you, Tom. See, that's what happens. You volunteer for stuff. You get volunteered for other stuff.
Is there anybody else that might have some questions? We're here to be interactive with you and the reason you're here.
Well, I know in our shop and like all over the house, we have these little IKEA lights, these little LED lights that you put magnets on, so we stick them everywhere because, I don't know, as I get older, it's harder to see, and we're just trying to illuminate everything. And they're kind of cheap. They're not cheaply made. They're just about $15 a piece, I think.
$9 a piece.
Or $9 a piece at IKEA. So.
There's another thing that Lauren's next video for this Discover Woodturning series is going to be on personal protection equipment. And this is a particular interest of ours. I explained that I'm a motorcycle rider, and although there are people that will ride in a t-shirt and flip-flops, I'm not that guy. I'm in full armored regalia, full face helmet, Kevlar clothing, boots. I have a helmet-mounted brake light, wireless helmet-mounted brake light. If I've got a headlight modulator, a taillight modulator, I'm all hooked up.
So it's on the back of your
It's on the back of the helmet.
Why,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, your cars now have brake lights in the rear window for the same reason, right? So the thing is, when we start talking about physical limitations, you want to do everything you can to keep your body from deteriorating. We know people over the past several years, and one very recently, that is giving up wood turning, and it might be because it became allergic to the dust. Well, that usually doesn't just come on like that. A lot of this is contact allergies. So Lauren and I, when we're in the shop, we understand that we are in a minority. But very simply put, if our lathe is turned on, our respirator helmets and dust collector is on. Not just when we're sanding, very simple. If the lathe is spinning, our protective gear is on. And I was at a Totally Turning a couple of years back, and in the vendor area, there was a woman from some wood organization that said, "Do you know which wood is toxic to inhale?" And I said, "I don't care." She said, "What do you mean you don't care?" I said, "I'm not going to inhale any of it." You see, there's an old line that says there are two types of turners: those who are allergic to cocobolo and those who will become allergic to cocobolo. And so a lot of these things are cumulative and very often irreversible. Hearing loss is cumulative and irreversible. So you have to protect your lungs, you have to protect your eyes, you have to protect your hearing. And we use an interesting tool. I actually have them in my pocket. I'll just dangle them here because they're just cord. Although these are a little expensive, what I've got here, and let me just switch to this one here. What I've got here are Bose noise canceling headphones. They fit in your ear with little gel inserts. They're very, very comfortable. And my shop, the room where my lathe is about 10 by 10 with 6'3" ceilings. And you put on a 2 horsepower dust collector, it's like there's a jet engine in the room with you. And so this knocks out that noise, brings it down to a low hum, yet it still lets through noises like I can hear my chisel because it's not a droning kind of sound. I can hear people talk to me and things like that. And I like to listen to music while I turn. And I didn't want to wear earplugs and then have to turn the music up so loud to get past the earplugs. So these have speakers in them. And the interesting thing about this, I now consider this to be a piece of safety equipment because I have the music on my phone. So the phone is in my pocket. I route the cord into my smock so that it's not going to get tangled on anything. And I plug the end of the earphones into the phone. And I'm listening to music at very, very low level. But if I found myself unexpectedly on the floor, for whatever reason, I could press the little button on the pendant and say, "Siri, call 911," because I'm connected to my telephone. Bringing a telephone into the shop, I know people that are motorcycle riders, and they take their cell phone and they put it in their saddlebags. I say, no, it's got to be in your jacket pocket, because when you go flung 30 feet from the bike, the fact that it's in your saddlebag doesn't do you very much good. You want your phone with you. So I want my communications to be with me when I'm in the shop. A shop can be a dangerous place. A piece of wood, as much as people tell you to stay out of the line of fire, there is no line of fire. A piece of wood that goes and bounces off your ceiling and smashes your fluorescent light fixture, there is no place safe. So you need to protect yourself. So protecting your hearing, your eyesight, your respiratory system, the rest of your body, will mitigate the odds of you having to deal with physical limitations that you weren't bright enough to try to avoid in the first place. Question back that way, Lauren. Hand the mic that way, please.
I run a wood-turning school in California, and I'm interested in hearing from people what a reasonable accommodation would be if someone comes into my class, registers for an open course, and comes in with various different physical limitations. For instance, I have a number of lathes that are on fixed stands, which means that their height is set, take it like a Powermatic or a Nova or something like that. So the height is fixed. I have a bunch of mini lathes which are on square closed stands, which you can't pull a chair under, maybe next to. And I've had people with amputees.
Platform. You could
I'm sorry?
platform if you had to, right?
Yeah, she was just mentioning you could provide platforms to the short people and make them easier.
We have movable platforms, right, thank you. I've had people with amputations. I've had people with medical situations. I've had people with back problems. And that's the limit of physical limitations that we have encountered so far. I think to some extent, as the students come in from the community, they're self-starting themselves away from wood turning. This is probably something I can't do, so I won't register for one of these classes. But I'd like to hear from those of you who have solved these problems individually. What could I do in a general community like this? Brent and I have talked about the sit-down lathe stands and having something like that available to account for the day when it's going to happen that somebody comes in a chair. Or I had a person in my beginning class last semester who has a severe back problem, and we had to make him actually sit down every now and then. Otherwise, he'd go home and crawl in bed at the end of the class. And it's what he said he had to do. So I'm just interested in, okay, here's a general shop with normal stuff. One thing I've heard so far is shorter handles on some of the bowl tools would be helpful for people who are having to move the tool past the front of their body. I hadn't thought about that. I can easily make a set of those tools and have them in a drawer. So I'd like to hear some other inputs.
But pass the mic over that way.
Well, hi, my name is Alan Cooper. I'm from Toronto. And 2 years ago at the AAW in Pittsburgh, we had a class, people who were veterans with shakes. We also, some shakes, and we had people who were autistic. Now, some of the methods that are now used that Andy has set up, really from her experience in turning for the blind, can be used as well. For example, let's say you have an autistic person who can't get his or her hand straight and you're trying to get them to hold on to a tool. Well, we've done that. And again, if you have your hands on the tool with them and their hands are positioned so that you've always got your hands closest to the lathe when it's moving, and the person is also familiarized, to go through the basics, familiarizing themselves by what they're going to touch, how it's going to move, what's going to happen, and then you guide them through it, then you find that they're able to work easier. Again, as some people suggested, when you've got people who are bending over the lathe, then obviously if you have stands, or you get what do they call them, pallets, cheap enough, and I think it's about 4 inches difference in height, so you build up some pallets, but you've got to make sure that they don't fall off the pallets. So those are a couple of problems. If you're really worried about somebody because of, let's say the person that comes in and he has an explosive personality and he gets very frustrated, show him what to do, and gets a kickback, the tool, and he starts getting very angry. So you can say we want to do this on a one-to-one basis, but you know, worse at all, we'd like to get a medical certificate saying it's okay for you to be handling a dangerous situation, because turning can be a dangerous situation. So that's some suggestions.
Yeah, I really found that when you have folks that have some mental issues, that helping them and holding on with them really does seem to calm them down quite a bit, because then they feel like they're not totally having to be in control, that there's somebody there with them to help. And I like to tell them it's just a gentle guiding.
One of my past students he's an autistic, he's a young man now, but I started when he was 17, and I found out one thing that really helps him. He needs hearing muffs, what we used to call in the military mouse ears. He can't take the extra noise that's in the shop. The individual, now he's supplementing his income with his bowls and pens and platters. You know, so he's done quite well.
And sometimes they also get afraid of the shields. And in that case, you know, a nice pair of very thick goggles, depending on what you're working on, helps the situation too. I've had quite a few folks that the shields have made them really claustrophobic, and enough to so they wouldn't want to turn. But again, you have to really make sure that you have safety first in all those cases.
You got the mic.
Coming here recently, I heard of a program for people that have tremors, and one of the programs has been bringing them to the gym and teaching them how to box. Big movement. Also weightlifting. One experience I had years ago at a workshop in La Honda, California, with people from all over the world. It was a Tai Chi workshop, and met this husband and wife team and became good friends with them. It just so happens his wife born on the same day I am, and we're doing a push hands workshop, and she had tremendous tremors. But the moment she would do Tai Chi, it stopped. It was amazing. I'm not saying Tai Chi is a cure-all, but I know that Tai Chi has a lot of health benefits because it's an internal thing. It's not about external. So we're talking about sensory. Those that don't have vision are counting on those sensories, and they're heightening them. That's the same principle about Tai Chi. A good teacher will tell you that and emphasize it. And that's the essence of Tai Chi. It's very martial because you're doing these natural movements that are natural. That in the case of an emergency, you do things automatically as opposed to practicing a hardcore martial art where if you don't practice the technique is worthless. So the movements of Tai Chi are very natural movements. So every time I turn to my left or right, I don't just turn around, I tend to lift my elbow. I don't know what's coming, it's just natural. So they're teaching you natural movements that can be applied to so many things, but the fact that when you do Tai Chi, there's a little bit of tension between being limp and overexerted. There's a point in between. And for me, my hands start shaking because there's energy to them. Because if you do this, there's energy there, but it's only going there. And if I do this, it's going back and forth. But the moment you emphasize this a little bit, the joints are open, so there's a flow of energy. So if you could, not at the level that I've taken it to, but someone who's good, because Tai Chi's come into a lot of health facilities, is the benefits of it. They've done so many studies. You might look into that for those that are impaired in some limitation, for flexibility, blood pressure, a number of things that it just has tremendous qualities. It's ancient, and things that to me are ancient seem to still work. And it's just one thing to look into, and for me, it's done a lot of things. So.
Well, we are running short of time now, which is a lovely thing. And what I'd like to do, Tom, did you have something you wanted in particular to add? But just before we do that, I want to, after you're done, I want to pass the mic around to the audience for some final comments from the audience. And what if you can think about this, what is the one thing that you know now that you wish someone had told you before that you want to sort of pass on to anybody that's maybe viewing this video later on? So, Tom?
One thing I heard, and in what I do, we always look at, okay, are you doing it safely? And all through the symposium, we hear about safety. So one of the things is you don't want to do is put yourself in a situation that you're going to injure yourself. If you're going to stand on a platform, that might not be the safest place for you to be to get close to the tool. Bring the tool to you rather than putting you to the tool. Raise the lathe, lower the lathe, but keep yourself on an even plane. That way, if something happens and you have to step back, you're not going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a student that used to turn about 10 years ago, and he finally quit because he couldn't stand. He had back problems, leg problems, and I built him a sit-down lathe with he had a mini lathe, and I've got a sit-down lathe that I built a few years ago, and I've got a robust lathe. Brent knows that. But
Rick's a real handy guy.
I can weld and make stuff, and so if anybody needs things, a student, I'll fix something for him. But this guy's joined our club. He's joined the AAW. He's so excited about turning. He's making little honey dippers. He just tickled to death. So anything that you can do to help someone, that's what we should do, and really works good. So
Pass the mic back, please.
I'd just like to say a quick gratitude for Andy and Alan for bringing this up and keeping this discussion going. This is wonderful that we can all share and join in on this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
This is just this is a continuation of an ongoing discussion. Now there is believe it or not, on the AAW forum, there is a section called Woodturners with Disabilities, I think.
There's a tab.
Right, and it's a whole discussion forum which I think has like one message in it in the last 3 years. That's it. There is a place to continue the discussions. So. What is your name, please?
I'm Dave Hinkleman, and I'm from Tucson, Arizona. And actually, I sat on that panel with Andy in Phoenix and then again in Pittsburgh. And Andy, I'd like to thank you and Ellen for the opportunity yesterday to work with the blind folks. That was so much fun, and it was very rewarding.
Well, without you, we couldn't do it. So everyone needs one-on-one, and without all the volunteers, it would have never been possible.
And a comment to this gentleman, make sure your students can get all the way around the lathe. That was a big deal for me. I took a bunch of classes with Jim Beeman, and we finally had to figure out how I can get around, particularly when you take the tailstock off and you go in with a bowl gouge, that. And then lastly, one of the big things that's been around here is safety, particularly face shields. If any of you know Lynn Yamaguchi, a professional turner out of Tucson, she lost an eye a few years ago when a piece of mesquite blew up and hit her in the face. And she spent a year doing studies on various face shields. She now wears a police riot helmet that is so safe. But stay away from the Home Depot, Harbor Freight, cheapo face masks. They're useless.
Yeah, those are called those are splash shields.
Yeah.
They're just designed to keep water out of your face. You're absolutely right.
Spend the money and get a good quality certified wood face shield. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the C81, right.
Yep. Other comments from the audience? Oh, don't be shy. We've got a couple of minutes.
I'm Bob Harp from Oxford, Ohio. I have a very good friend whose son has been suffering from a birth defect, lost the left arm to practical use. And I'm thinking about offering him an opportunity to get involved in turning. And so I was looking for things that would give me some guidance in terms of how to make it desirable, for one, and try to begin to affect a move in his direction to get involved. And if there are any suggestions, I've heard a number of things that I can do, and I appreciate that, but are there any specific suggestions that would make it an opportunity? And I have 3 lathes and a nice, beautiful shop, so sharing is one of the things I want to do.
There's some comments from the other side here, yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah, get off the stick and do it. The thing I didn't know that I wish I knew then when I started was there are a lot of you people out there that can help us and help other people. And everyone sitting in this room and this gentleman here help somebody, go out and find them. They're not going to come to you. They don't know that you can help them. They don't know that you want to help them. Go out and help somebody.
How old is this young man?
He's in his 20s.
20s. Left hand lost it?
Left hand.
So he's right-handed. Stuart Batty came to our workshop and did a presentation, and he illustrated how wood turning is a one-handed thing. So there is one thing. And what he demonstrated, what the left hand just did is kind of like a weight. So there is something that was passed on and illustrated.
That's what I kind of anticipated.
Yes.
He would be able to lay that hand.
Exactly.
The microphone, please.
To some degree, but because he does it right good.
And he's a great teacher. Him and I relate because I told him he's a right-handed martial arts, and he said, "How do you know all that?" I said, "Because I study movement." And he came and gave a workshop, and he said, "I don't want to teach you how to make anything," but he teaches the essence of turning also. And it's 40-40 grind, but he illustrated how it's one-handed and how the left hand does very little.
Okay.
So,
and you had a comment over there?
I was just going to suggest whether this person's ever turned with you in this, and he, all right, and this was, put, have him.
The problem is just simply getting it turned on to get some enticing.
The pen is the perfect thing.
Yeah. Well, have him turn with you in a sense of, hands for the turning.
Yeah.
So that he's got to feel and he's going to feel comfortable at some stage, and he's going to say, "Would you please take your hand off? Let me try this myself." So that way, it's going to go at his pace really, and you've got control, of him. Which is something I was going to say to you, James, and that was if you take somebody and have them put their hands on you as you do the turning, it's going to take a short period of time where the person feels that your hands are really obstructing his being able to turn. And ask you to move your hands, or one hand, and then maybe the other hand, and then suddenly, whee, I'm doing it myself. Wow. So I think that's another method you can use. And as far as the idea of the pallets and falling off the pallets, if you have about 6 pallets around, then the person isn't going to fall off them.
Right. Now we are pretty much out of time. There's been a lot of wonderful ideas here in the room. We're all around for the duration of the conference. This stuff should continue over dinner, in the hallways, to everybody you can talk to about this. It's not about necessarily disability. It's about how we adapt to the changes in our bodies, to the changes in our hearing, to the changes in the people around us, and how we continue the enjoyment of wood turning. So I'll hand it over to Andy for final words, and then we'll throw you out of the room.
And it's also, as Alan says, how we help others and how we're there for others and how we can make a difference in their lives. And so many times when you have either a physical or a mental challenge, you want to give up. And those are the people we really, really want to help, to inspire them, because wood turning, it really has given me a new lease on life and a purpose to get up every day. And starting the schools has been amazing, because the way these folks feel the first time they make something,
We'll get you, Chuck, in a
is
minute.
exactly the way I felt. So I hope you guys go away inspired and ready to help everybody.
Yeah, I asked Chuck to wave because I muted his microphone. So Chuck?
Yep, okay. What I would like to ask is if people could think about ways to help, say, someone like me shopping at gouges correctly, maybe things that adapt to, say, the Wolverine system or other systems. That's not really very expensive, but maybe some type of captive system, so when the gouge doesn't skate off the wheel, because that's my main problem, is sharpening. And trying to get a good edge is damn near impossible sometimes. So maybe if people could talk about that, or maybe Lyle and Brent and being professionals, you know, if they get their mechanical engineers, or somebody just has a good idea and bring it up, and maybe help some of us who, like me, who need it.
All right, Lyle has some thoughts on that, briefly. Lauren's turning on the mic.
Yeah, we're already out of time, but the Wolverine 2, II2, is a system that keeps that cutter, the sharpening, right in the middle of the grinding wheel, and that would be a great help for you. Check that out, see if that will work. Find somebody who's got one and try it once. I think you'll see that it'll be a whole new ball game.
All
Thanks
right.
for those thoughts.
So we, as they say in the movies, go home, or
Yeah.
go ahead.
If anybody has any questions, we're all up here. Feel free to come up and ask.
Yeah, it's going to take me a little while to break down my equipment, and I will make this video available to everybody.
Andy, this cookie and
That